Okay. Now today, is Chinese agriculture prospering today? Or at the beginning of this case, this case talks about the reforms of the 80s and 90s. And what does happen that is not so tragic for farmers after the Maoist period, though? Jonathan?
In 1978, there was the household responsibility system,
Right.
which reintroduced private incentive into agriculture. It caused an increase in productivity. I think from 1978 to 2007, the poverty declined from like 30.7% down to 1.6%. So huge declines, along with great increases in wages.
Right. And that's really
Productivity increased a lot.
a huge part of that is a return. Basically, this household responsibility system is another way of calling family farming, which had been the basic structure of Chinese farming forever, or at least as far as we know, but at least back to Tang, or back to Sung period. So families taking care of their own. What does Chinese agriculture look from that point toward today? That?
It's like pseudo-privatized. So the land still is owned by
Pseudo-privatized. That's a really good,
The land is still owned
good
by
word.
the state,
Yeah.
but for all intents and purposes, it's treated as if it's privatized. The owners of the land can sublease their land. Above certain quotas, they're allowed to actually sell their extra produce on the market. So it essentially mirrors like a basic market system, but there's some basic government intervention.
Right. So it becomes once again a family-run, and now without landlords, family-run, market-driven agricultural system that really takes off, an enormous boom in agricultural production in the 1980s in particular. Nadia?
And even though the government still controlled the land and owned it, but after meeting the production quotas, these farmers could sell whatever excess they have at the market and gain profits. So that helped the poverty rate decrease.
Right. So in the 50s and 60s, there were quotas that the state could take whatever it wanted, basically, and did take everything in the late 50s and early 60s. By the late 70s and 80s, the state quotas decreased very markedly. There are still some, but you can market the rest, and increasingly it becomes a privatized agricultural economy. You can invest in it, but again, do you own the land? Brian, if you're a farmer and you've built up in the 1980s a wonderful plot, you're growing vegetables for downtown Shanghai, and now people in Shanghai have the money to pay more for good vegetables, and you can grow things, so on, and you want your son to inherit it. What are his chances?
It's up to the government. The government still owns it nominally, and the person just works on it and has to meet the government.
No, you really don't know. Your family has a contract to do it, up to decades, but you don't know for sure if your son, who's likely to go to the city anyway, because he wants to get out, see the world, and make more actual cash, but you don't know for sure. So, Roseanne, if I'm the government of X and Y township, and you have a farm, but I really would like to expand a road through your farm, what happens?
Then you get to expand the road.
I get to expand the road, and you get to move.
Yeah.
And do you get compensated, Roseanne?
Yeah, I think I do get compensated. But I think that the government has the say in terms of like evaluating the compensation rate.
Right. Assuming that one knows eventually what the market price of this land will be, what percentage do you think you get of the ultimate market price? Once this land is built, the road goes through, there are shopping malls on either side of it.
Probably not a lot.
Probably not a lot. Anybody guess, Kim?
I just can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So if it talked about in the text how it was problematic that some people, like farmers, were selling their land to developers because that then further decreased the amount of arable land.
Right.
If a farmer sold the land to a developer, but then the government decided they wanted that plot of land, say, to build a highway or something, could they destroy that development, and who would be compensated?
In that case, the developer. The developer would be compensated. And it's perfectly possible. The government can take land more than once. After all, there's only so much land, and it's the largest source of income for local governments across China, are land sales and resales. But your farmer, your average, it's a statistic that is really quite stunning, and it seems to be getting higher. But in the last decade, so much farmland lost to development by this kind of, my taking Roseanne's farm, you would get on average about 2% of the ultimate market value of land adjacent to large urban areas. And then you have nothing to do. So it's a very, very difficult situation, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are moving to cities. And Chinese agriculture is really under different kinds of stresses now. Sure. So this return to family farming is a huge boost to productivity, a one-time boost. But it still doesn't solve the issue of who invests in agriculture for the long haul. Chaz?
I just had a quick question about, I guess Jonathan was talking about how like the return to family farming increased their productivity because people could sell their excesses to the market.
And they could sell goods that are to go to real markets, yes,
So
rather than just by state plan.
why did the government still have like the quotas? What were the food or like the crops that were being grown with the quotas? Where was that going? If there was also a market.
So why would the government still have, even for example, a tax in grain that you would pay in grain, some percentage of it? Why would it still have this as it would until the late 80s, early 90s in a significant way? Why do you think? It's a great question. And I don't know that there's only one answer to it. Julianne?
Maybe the revenue is going to the industrialization during that period.
So part of it is that agricultural productivity still pays for industrialization, which is still state-run. Some of it is, not much of it is exported by this period of time, but it was in the 50s and 60s. Probably another answer is that, Nadia.
Could it be like in the Tang system where it's sort of renting the land, so they give them the land to use it, and that's what the farmers pay to the government for you in exchange for using the land?
It is a kind of a rent. You're thinking right. You can think of all farmers are effectively sharecroppers in this regard, but the crops are shared with the state. Why does the state need them? Well, increasingly, it doesn't. But governments change policy sometimes pretty slowly, even after there are bureaucracies in place. How long has there been a land tax in China? This kind of tax in grain and so on. Jake?
Well, centuries, over 2 millennia.
2 millennia.
Over 2 millennia.
Over 2 millennia. How many millennia? I don't know.
2.5.
2.5. That's a great question. But I have no idea. Probably about 2.5, at least 2 millennia.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. 2,600. 2,600. So you were so close. Okay. And does China have a land tax today? Henry, what do you think? Does China have a land tax today?
Agricultural tax was meant as a measure to relieve farmers of some burdens, especially inequality between rural and urban citizens. So no agricultural tax.
For the first time, not just in memory, but as far as we can tell in history, there is no agricultural tax. That is the taxing of agricultural goods going to the state. And this was abolished by Premier Wen Jiabao, a great reform, actually, I think in 2006. Now, what's it like to be a Chinese farmer today? Is it a good life? Michael?
Well, it seems like there's a lot of migration to cities,
Right.
but they don't have a hukou, and so there's a lot of migrant workers in cities like Shenzhen who don't have like the same health care and schooling and financial benefits, and so it's sort of like an awkward position. And it seems like a lot of the older people within families are sort of staying behind in the rural areas.
So what kind of social benefits do farmers have already in China? I mean, why you move to cities and you don't have, you're right. So there's obviously something going on where whatever your situation in the countryside is, you believe it will be improved by moving or having some members of your family move to new opportunities in the city. And that's in part because there are more people on the land than it needs in order to till them. Kennedy?
The reading talked about how the government was willing to pay for about 9 years of education for farmers.
Right.
But for other living expenses and other costs, such as textbooks, clothing, stuff like that, a lot of farmers couldn't afford it. And in order to improve their standard of living, would try and move into cities. And then when they couldn't do that, it led to many problems.
Okay. But education is improved markedly. In the early years of the People's Republic, before the famine, rudimentary public health is improved markedly for farmers. So education is there, but it's not free. If you have no money for textbooks, it's very complicated. What about health insurance? or other forms of social insurance? Are there pensions for farmers?
No.
There are no pensions. There's no social, throughout most of the history of the People's Republic, despite it being, in aspiration, a communist system, there's absolutely no social security system for farmers. There is one for urban residents, particularly for those connected with state-owned enterprises, and there is not for farmers. Until very recently, under Premier Wen Jiabao, introduced an extraordinary plan to give every farmer a rudimentary health care, what you might call a floor, under which you could not fall, at least a foundation of health insurance, which one hopes will be the building block of a much more grand system. But it's very late in coming. It really doesn't happen until the 21st century.